Hi there, it's Jeff Evely, Ops-Sgt Major with Veterans for Freedom. I'm back with you here on the 28th of July to discuss Tamara Lich's release earlier this week. We've been watching some of the reporting on it. It's been rather eventful. Sort of the usual bad actors play and the usual kind of good ones countering. So I just thought I'd start us off with a quick intro here as to what's been going on with Tamara's situation. Of course, we did a couple of podcasts on this before where we discussed how there's been a kind of overzealousness on the part of the prosecutor. She keeps getting put in jail by justices of the peace and keeps getting released by higher actual judges with law degrees in higher courts, whereas these justices of the peace appear at least to be political appointees. So she was hauled back after the picture that she took with Tamar, who's another one of our Veterans for Freedom members, and so we're just finding out now that she's been re-released after spending 49 days in jail, if I'm not mistaken. So probably way more time in jail than anyone would ever spend on a mischief charge. And I found that Sheila Gunn-Reid, she was doing a really great job of reporting as it was coming out. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys that. Hey, Danny.
Hey, how are you?
Good, man. Glad you made it. Or glad you could make it.
Yeah, sorry. It was last minute trying to get the water fixed in the house.
Oh, yeah. The fun never stops.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys got me there. And so basically one of the first things that's kind of catching my eye here is Sheila's quoting the judge as having said, "There is no doubt in my mind that Mr. Kirinji is passionate about the case." So the guy that she's talking about is this guy. We covered this in the podcast before. This is Kirinji, the guy who gave $17,000 to the Liberal Party of Canada. And she goes on from there to say, I found this interesting. The judge also said that there has been a strict compliance with the conditions, save for the picture with Mr. Marazzo, and there is a very live question about whether there was a breach at all. So we discussed this, I think, when we had Danny on last time. Danny and Tom were here with Tom Marazzo as well. And we were kind of talking about that and how her actual condition, I brought the documents up here, said that she could be in contact with other convoy organizers in the presence of lawyers. Now, I think she got some clarification on that from the judge and said that, it would have to be for the purpose of something related to one of her civil proceedings or criminal proceedings. So she got some clarification on that, but there was really no change in her conditions, and she was released with some pretty scathing comments from the judge. Here's another one. Ms. Lich is not charged with sedition or inciting a riot. While the protests were of a national import, the charges here relate to minor offenses in the criminal code. I find it highly unlikely this 49-year-old woman with no criminal record would spend any more time in jail. And then he goes on to say, I take judicial notice of the harm caused by the Freedom Convoy to the citizens of Ottawa and governments, but no court should seek to control the possession of political views. So that's the most encouraging thing that I've seen in a while. And before I go on to that, I'm going to take some comments from Sheila here, just to...
Your Twitter feed today. I was riveted by it. I couldn't refresh. Click, click, click. I was waiting for the updates. And obviously I wasn't alone. It looked like tens of thousands of people were following along in real time. Maybe even more than that. I've never seen such Twitter engagement on your feed before. I think people were riveted.
I think so too. I think, for the layperson to tune into court, it can be a little bit difficult. And it even is for me, and I do court reporting all the time, to sort of weave through the legal language. But what we saw in court today was an actual judge making an actual ruling on the actual evidence before him. And this judge just ripped apart the assessment of the prior justice of the peace, a non-lawyer who had ordered Tamara Lich's bail revoked and sent her back to jail at the end of June. Today, it marked 49 days of incarceration for her on minor mischief charges, minor stuff. As a 49-year-old person with a non-criminal background, she would likely not even spend a day in jail for what she's done, but she's approaching 49
and some of the
days
Pat
in
King
jail.
stuff as well.
And the last thing I heard that judge say today was, Madam Constable, take off those shackles.
Yeah. You know, it's been a while since I practiced criminal law. I haven't practiced any law.
Yeah, Madam Constable, take those shackles off. It's what the justice said.
Yeah, that was a great quote, I thought. So, and then I saw this from Lauren Gunter in the Edmonton Sun. Lauren Gunter is usually pretty friendly to our side. Federal judge correct to question why Tamara Lich was still in jail. We're not talking about sedition. We're not talking about inciting a riot. We're talking about mischief here. And he says, we're not talking, oh, he's just going to repeat that. Those were the words of Federal Court Justice Andrew Goodman before he released the Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Lich from jail on bail again. Throughout Lich's 2-day bail hearing in Ottawa this week, Goodman was incredulous. He couldn't seem to believe this woman was still in jail. After all, she has no criminal record and is charged with a non-violent crime. But at Monday's and Tuesday's court proceedings, it seemed equally clear that Ontario's prosecutors and Crown Prosecutor Moitz Karimjee in particular have a hate-on for Lich from Medicine Hat. If you don't think Lich is being singled out for persecution rather than mere prosecution, consider this exchange between Judge Goodman and Karimjee. The judge seemed flabbergasted by Karimjee's contention that if Lich is eventually found guilty, the Crown would be seeking a sentence of 10 years in prison. The average armed robbery sentence in Canada is under 4 years. Okay, it continues on, but I'm going to carry on from that. I think I'd like to throw this over to our intelligence officer, Tom Quiggan, to see what he's been digging up on this and get some analysis from his side of the house first. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Jeff. A whole bunch of things jump out at me, but as a former military guy who served in places like Bosnia and Croatia, Serbia, I've also been in like an Albania, Belarus, and Ukraine and Russia. A whole bunch of things jump out at me right off. The first is we used to mock those countries and we used to serve in those countries during times of conflict, especially Bosnia and Croatia, because of the political breakdown of their systems. We would mock them for their political prisoners. And now, when you look at the case of Tamara Lich, you cannot but come to the conclusion that the reason she's been in jail now on a couple of different occasions for as long as she has is a political decision, not a criminal or justice decision. She's a political prisoner by definition. And as the judges pointed out, what is somebody with a non-violent charge doing in jail this long anyway? So there's that kind of thought right off the top of my head is welcome to Canada. We now have political prisoners and we now have underground churches. Like, where is our country going? So guys like you and me and a bunch of other vets served in these places in order to try and work against that kind of violence, that kind of political breakdown. And now here we are living it in Canada. So that's my first thought. Now, I've testified in court a bunch of times on behalf of the RCMP and on behalf of defense lawyers and whatever, criminal court, federal court, IRB court. The thing that just jumped right off the page at me was the justice of the peace who decided to hold her in jail again. And he said, well, you know, if I release her, it could call the justice system into disrepute. And I just thought, wow, first off, no, the decision to hold her will call it into disrepute. But more importantly, a bail hearing is decided on three main ideas. First off, is there a likelihood that the person will reoffend? Well, probably not. There's no more convoy. It's gone. It's over. So will she reoffend? Probably not. Second thing is, will she flee the jurisdiction? So when you got a guy like Bill Gates in the courtroom, you got to ask, will he flee the jurisdiction? He's got $1 billion or more. He's got a private jet. He's got multiple passports. So yeah, that guy could take off on you. Tamara Lich is not rich. She's not a dual citizen. She doesn't have access to private jets. So she's not going to flee the jurisdiction. The other thing is, would her release cause outrage in the community? And that condition wasn't met either. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Her being held in jail has caused outrage in the community. So all I can tell you is this: my view, based on my work with the convoy, with the research work I did into my book, Eyewitness to Deceit, says, look, Justin Trudeau's Justice Department is pursuing these cases. Arrest them, throw them in jail, throw everything at you possibly can, and then let the courts sort it out. And by the way, they're getting the job done. In other words, people right across the country are going, wow, you know, I don't think I better donate money to one of those freedom groups. Wow, I better not go to one of those marches because I could get nailed by the government even though I'm doing nothing. So, you know, here we go. Our justice system has been politicized, just like the RCMP, just like the military, just like Elections Canada, whatever. So yeah, that's my feeling. At the end of the day, this is a political action, and this is the kind of junk we used to see in places like, you know, wartime Bosnia, wartime Croatia, those kinds of places.
That's a really good point you make. I'm a civilian, right? I'm not necessarily one of you guys, but I've been allied with you guys for a long time, and seeing the way that they handle that, and the way that they pointed out like that. I met Danny too. I met you earlier on in this, and they turn this and they try to weaponize it against us.
Yeah, I think that it seems to be the case that they're going after a lot of these mischief charges and stuff like that that are basically a reach to begin with. You know, they're kind of trumped up to begin with because she's not even accused of like breaking anything. And when you look at the criminal code, I think the one article under mischief is that she's being accused of is the impediment to use of property or something like that.
Obstructing the lawful enjoyment.
Thanks.
Of
I was just going to
property.
throw it to you, Danny.
Like
Let's get the legal thing in there, Danny.
Okay, so I used to arrest people for mischief all the time under that subsection of the criminal code, but I was never under the impression that it was ever intended to charge someone, right? Like the classic example of a general duty or patrol officer arresting someone for mischief under that subsection of the criminal code would be, say, Jeff, you have a party at your house. Dacey media shows up uninvited, drunk, trying to fight people, refusing to leave after you've asked him to leave. You call the police. We come. He still continues to refuse to leave, therefore continuing the commission of the offense because he's obstructing your lawful enjoyment of your property. I can arrest him for mischief to remove him from the residence, thereby eliminating him from or preventing him from continuing to commit the criminal offense.
Sorry,
right?
Hold up a second.
I had to commit an offense in the first place for that to even be relevant, right?
Well, that's where mischief was kind of a little bit of a catch-all for removing unwanted people from residences, right?
Yeah, okay.
Because
like
if you're in a public place, you could fall under the provision of causing a disturbance, but in a private residence, that does not apply. So then we could use the offense of mischief to make an arrest, remove you from the residence. Therefore, I have prevented you from continuing the commission of the criminal offense of mischief. And then typically you're going to be, sent along your way, or, if you're really drunk and belligerent, you might be held in the drunk tank to be released when sober.
Yeah. So normally they would be like kind of like a bylaw type offense or a drunken disorderly type thing. Just
yeah. I mean, you could write, depending on the circumstance, you could write like a provincial offenses ticket or that wasn't our standard practice when I worked up north.
Extreme escalation, right? It would escalate to.
So is it normal for anybody to spend the time waiting for their bail hearing in jail while they're on those charges?
For something like this, Tamara's? No, not that I've ever seen before. I think I discussed the last time we did a roundtable. Like my experience was violent repeat offenders who terrorize their communities don't serve this kind of time on remand. Right. Unless they have shown like a repeated pattern of behavior over and over and over again, and they have demonstrated that they will fail to comply repeatedly. Because, I mean, people breach their conditions all the time. And so again, I'll just reiterate, what we've seen with Tamara is completely disproportionate to what my experience was as a police officer.
Right. There was this this consistent pattern that I'm not the first one to point out, I don't think, but we were talking about it the last time we were here, where we see these justices of the peace that are essentially like they're appointees there, and the one that, or at least the last one that Tamara had, didn't even have a law degree, and it's not clear to me that he had any kind of degree. He just kind of seemed like an Ottawa resident who had been there his whole life and kind of active in the community. He was a public servant for a number of years, so he was just kind of a standard sort of run-of-the-mill bureaucrat. So there seems to be this pattern of kind of the folks who are part of the machine, who are these political appointees and underqualified, going after these political dissidents and stretching things about as far as they can go. And you have this this public prosecutor as well, who's a well-known liberal donor, who's been called out now for the second time as kind of being overzealous by the judges. And it seems like they're just kind of pursuing these avenues and expecting that it's like, well, you know, they're probably going to win on appeal, or, you know, they'll go ahead and crack down on us and let us fight it out in the courts. But that takes a lot of resources, and that takes a lot of time, and it's a hardship on people's families and whatnot. So it has a real chilling effect on the rest of the movement. So yeah, it seems like a real travesty, but it's not like I think it's the rank and file. I think I've said to you before, Danny. So what is the way out of this, I guess, in terms of the appeal to the justice system? I mean, how do we get back to a place where you know, political appointees aren't abusing the justice system for the sake of suppressing any political opposition?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so one point I just wanted to touch on. My experience was that there were different levels of justice of the peace and what authority or what duties they could perform. Like, for example, some justice or JPs, they have a higher level. I guess it would be a higher level of training or credentials where they can hear bail hearings, they can sign off on search warrants. And then there's like a level below that where they can swear informations and, you know, probably issue a warrant for arrest.
Yeah.
But they're not going to issue a warrant to search a house or sit and oversee a bail hearing. So there are different levels. I'm not entirely certain what the criteria are in order to be at those different levels. Whereas, like, you know, a judge has to serve as a criminal attorney ahead of time. And I think typically they serve as both a Crown prosecutor for a period of time and then a defense attorney for a period of time before they're considered to be a judge. Yeah. So there definitely is a discrepancy there in when it comes to weighing evidence. Now, I will say that, you know, based on what I saw from both judges who reviewed Tamara's bail hearing, so both judges that ended up releasing her, I think that's a positive in the fact that they still seem to be willing to judge things in a more objective manner. Yeah. And I mean, and like you said, some of the comments that were made by Judge Goodman during this last bail hearing, it was clear to me he's kind of applying his previous standard to her situation and saying, like, yeah, we're not talking about, like you said with that news article, we're not talking about sedition here, like we're talking about mischief. Yeah. And that it's very unlikely that she would serve a serious jail term for that. Now, so that with Tamara, combined with the overturning of the convictions against Pastor Pawlowski, is that how you pronounce his name? Pawlowski?
Pawlowski, I think, yeah.
Out in Alberta, and the fact that AHS has to reimburse him I think it's roughly $60,000. And then just saw a recent announcement from Rocco Galati in Ontario I think it's Superior Court.
Hmm.
Tom Q, you might be able to correct me on that, in regards to the CPSO and how their muzzling efforts of physicians is unconstitutional.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so I think we are seeing positive signs from the higher level of the courts in the fact that they are willing to be more objective and actually weigh the evidence, as opposed to just taking judicial notice that the mainstream narrative is fact, as opposed to listening to evidence from both sides. Now, I guess to answer your question about how we get out of this,
like, what can we do to protect ourselves from this kind of malicious use of the process, you know?
Oh, well, I don't have
eh?
a real satisfactory answer, because we're, like I said, we're in uncharted territory. Like we're operating in an environment that is completely outside of what I was used to in my time as a policeman. Mm-hmm. But I do think we're seeing positive signs. Mm-hmm. I think the public opinion is starting to tilt more towards individual rights and freedoms, and the political will is as well. And so therefore, hopefully the courts are taking notice and will come back into line of like actually following the law instead of just, you know, erring on the side of the narrative.
Right. I mean, if they were in a bubble before, it's got to be busted by now.
I think so. Yeah.
I want to throw something up here from one of the comments. Somebody is saying, don't forget Pat King was in jail for 150 days straight for the same charges as Tamara. He just got out this week too. So that was another big one. The Artur Pawlowski case was a big one. That was in the province of Alberta. So it's at least a precedent. It's not federal, but they basically threw it out and said that everything that was done to that guy was illegal. Everything the state did to them was illegal there. So I think that's a big win. Personally. So that's definitely positive. And I wanted to maybe go at this other element of this too, because I've been posting a little bit about CBC being Antifa and stuff like that, because some other stuff that we have going on more toward the East Coast right now. And it really does seem like the people in the media are a part of this authoritarian machine. So I'm going to give you another share screen here. And I want to get some of Dacey's comments on this in a minute, because he was right there when this happened. So this is right on the release. 1 second now. All right, so this is right on the release. So they're all saying it's the cameraman that's the problem.
I don't care. Oh, that's good. You don't care.
Favorite part. Yeah, that's my favorite part right there. So I'm going to throw this over to Dacey, because he was kind of right there. And I'm going to cue this up first, I think, Dacey, because this was pretty great, I thought. You got me there? Okay.
So it's the second day of Tamara Lich's bail review hearing in Ottawa, Ontario. And we got this guy here, Glenn McGregor, is reporting on things. Says there's about a dozen Lich supporters in the gallery, including the guy who spent 90 minutes yelling conspiracy theories before Pat King's release. He's talking about Brian Dirksen, the trucker that never left. And I have quite a bit of video that would refute your statement there, man. Brian Dirksen says a lot of things. People don't like what he has to say because he speaks the truth. This one is, man, this one's even better or worse, depends. The woman who joined him at one point put on a fake Chinese accent is also there. The woman with the fake Chinese accent he's talking about is Zhuang Yang Annie on Facebook. She is a Chinese immigrant with a heavy accent because she's a Chinese immigrant. She came from a communist country to this country, and she speaks on the Hill and gives speeches and is very, very involved in freedom movement and fake Chinese accent. There are important things you could be reporting on, man. Do better.
All right, Dacey, why don't you go ahead and fill us in on the rest of that story there? That was all right.
Yeah. That was kind of a crazy thing. Like, man, I was just doing my double live and I had a video recording. So when the people started pushing up against me, I didn't really know what was happening. I just tried to not fall over Tamara and Lawrence Greenspan or whatever his name is. I didn't want to fall over top of them and whatever. And then I talked to Rich Longjoy afterwards, and I talked to a few people, and like, I mean, there's video there of Glenn McGregor is the one that allegedly, whatever, he was the one assaulting people then.
Mhm.
He pushed through with his camera people, like right over top of us. There's video I posted today that, you know, he pushed Steve G or SG Fox, I think he is now. He pushed him right into the glass of the court building. So like, you know, there was the one guy with the big beard, the OPS officer. I've seen him numerous times. He stared me down and wanted to do some intimidation stuff. I don't know. I don't really know what to make of it, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's kind of tough to see everything that's really going on kind of when the chaos starts like that. I was watching that guy with the beard there. I kind of like the way that he handled that, because I'm not even sure who the guy with the long white beard is there. He looks like he's CBC, and he kind of pushes him back and he says, "I don't care who you are." But I know Tom's trying to jump in with something here, so go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning here that guy, the guy in the blue suit with the bald head that's actually causing the problem, Glenn McGregor. He's a CTV guy. To the best of my knowledge, that's the third time he's been caught with this kind of problem. So on, I think it was February 3rd, I'd have to check the date, the convoy had its first sort of official press conference. Keith Wilson, the lawyer, was kind of the moderator. A couple of folks spoke. Tamara Lich spoke. And everything seemed to be going real well. Folks were well behaved. Questions were being asked. It's great. And then that guy, Glenn McGregor, literally started yelling at the top of his lungs, "When are you leaving Ottawa? You have to leave Ottawa. You can't be here." And I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just some nut off the street. I didn't realize he's an actual mainstream reporter. Yeah. So Keith Wilson cut the whole thing off and said, "You know what? We can't have this kind of behavior. We're just closing the thing down. So let's go." So as everybody starts to run out of the room, he goes charging into people with his elbows out. He pushed people over, elbowed them out of the way, just started screaming at everybody. And I actually thought he was some nutbar who, you know, wandered in off the street or something and was maybe, you know, mentally challenged or something. I didn't know what was going on. But he was incredibly violent and abusive to everyone. Then I find out afterwards, and I've got pictures of him because I took some video picture of him. I find out after he's a mainstream reporter, and I thought, well, he must be CBC because only they would act like that. And so apologies to CBC on that one. It wasn't you guys. It was CTV. Now, later, and this is the fun part, he tries to get into a hotel room in the Sheraton Hotel where there's a meeting going on, and he tries to force his way into the room. And he's told, it's a private meeting. You're not invited. Go away. Nonetheless, he's trying to push his way in. Now, the funny part of this story is Salma was there. Now, Salma's an Iranian kid. He's, I don't know, 25 or 28 or something. He was tortured in Iran. He was thrown in jail, all this stuff. He emigrates to Canada, and he says, you know, hell with Iran, I'm getting out of there. And he looks at this guy, and he says, in the opinion of an Iranian refugee, this guy is a government operative, not a reporter. And I just howled when Salma said that, because that's exactly the way Glenn McGregor was behaving, was he was being offensive, assertive. He tries to create a situation, and then people jump in and go, oh, look, those nasty convoy people said mean things to him. And it's like, well, if you wouldn't knock people out of the way, yell at everybody and scream and behave like an absolute boor, then these things wouldn't happen. So yeah, my question to CTV is, okay, guys, this is at least the third time this guy's pulled the trick. Here's the thing, rein this guy in. Jeff, your question about what do we do with all this stuff? The first is, we're doing it. We're sitting here right now calling these guys out, calling out the JP, looking at the judge, say maybe the judge is doing a good job here. Let me just say I've testified in 2 different bail hearings. One of them was a multi-day bail hearing for a terrorist. A real honest-to-God terrorist who was later convicted,
who had a real bomb, a real timer. He was part of a real Al-Qaeda inspired plot. The plot occurred in 4 different countries. This was Momin Khawaja for people with long memories. And yeah, we put a ton of stuff into court for that bail hearing because this was a serious case. But I was amazed to find out that in Tamara Lich's case, they submitted a 1,000-page document to the JP and a 1,400-page document to the JP for a friggin' mischief case where whether the offense even occurred or not was highly doubtful. But my point here is they put a huge amount of resources. They put police officers to work. They sent them across the country. They must have had a couple of dozen staff over at the Justice Department trying to frame up Tamara Lich on a highly questionable charge. And yeah, citizens have to call this out and say, look there, Justice Minister, we got rapists, murderers, gangbangers, child molesters running around Ottawa. You can't go down in the market at night anymore because of the random shootings. Here's an idea. Put your lawyers to work chasing bad guys and back off Métis women. And by the way, where's Justin Trudeau? Mr. Indigenous guy, Mr. Feminist, and who are they pounding the crap out of? A Métis woman. You just kind of shake your head. But yeah, keep calling this stuff out, keep challenging the system, keep talking about it, and I think that's a part of the solution.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that James Topp's kind of central message around this is pretty much right on point. It's all about showing courage. And, that's really what we're trying to get people to do right now, because it doesn't work if it's just one guy like James Topp. It's got to be everybody. And we've said here on this program before that I think the next big step is going to be stop boosting and show a little courage when it comes to not complying with the mandates if they try to come back in the fall, which we're half expecting, of course. I want to show another video here. This is Chris Dacey. We're talking about how these CTV and CBC and the state-funded media folks really are behaving like apparatchiks of the state. So here's something that Dacey was just mentioning here. I recommend you check out his page because he's always kind of right at wherever the action is. And this is her coming out, and you can get a pretty good view of what these guys are doing here from CTV. So people are kind of getting pushed from behind now. Asking them back up. Yeah. All right, Dacey. Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah. So Dacey, again, you're kind of right there. And have you seen this guy? Is this something that's been ongoing between you and this group from CTV? Because I thought I saw some other posts from you, particularly about the cameraman.
So I've never had any specific problem with this guy. Glenn McGregor, I did do a post about earlier that day. He accused Brian Dirksen, the trucker that never left, of spouting off 90 minutes of conspiracy theories. And then he's the one that accused Zhu Wang, Yang Annie on Facebook, of having a fake Chinese accent. So instead of covering the trial like a media person should, he was accusing a woman of having a fake Chinese accent. And then he assaulted a bunch of people.
Yeah. And
I was kind of like... I was just trying to, I got smacked by the crowd, but I had 2 phones going, and I was just trying to not fall over top of the people in front of me and directly into Lawrence Greenspan and Tamara. So I didn't see exactly what happened, but I did talk to Rich, and I talked to some of the people afterwards. And I mean, that same officer too, the OPS officer, it's on my live, but the guy with the beard there, he's the one that grabbed Rich kind of and went hands on Rich and shoved him. Him and I have gotten into it before. It's a lot of these officers in downtown Ottawa should have been cycled out a long time ago, I think. but they're there. Like they have histories with us now.
Well,
That
yeah,
makes
I
sense.
mean, they're just people too. We want to remind everybody, and I'm one of the first to call out wrongdoing when I see it, and I'll call them well-dressed band of thugs and the whole shebang. But intense stress over long periods of time is not something that any squishy mammal brain can endure effectively, in my own experience at least. So I'm willing to bet that the operational stress is taking its toll, even on the folks out there who have the very best of intentions. And that's something that we see in the military. But I think I'll throw that one over to Danny for a comment on operational stress, especially this far into the pandemic and the kind of impact that's had on the RCMP and partner police forces. Danny, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what would also contribute to that in that specific scenario right there is the crowd, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you're a small number of officers and you're faced with a potential crowd that's vastly outnumbers you, you have to be pretty decisive when you're either going to intervene or you're going to grab someone and reposition, because if that crowd turns on you, you're going to get mobbed. And so that's always in the back of your head when you're a police officer and you're outnumbered like that.
Yeah.
So that would weigh in on that for sure. And then in regards to the operational stress, like you said, this has been a very challenging 2 years for everybody. And I would say what might be different from between the police and the military as far as operational stress is my understanding, like talking to a number of psychologists who service both, is that, the military members often will go overseas. They will experience acute trauma, and then they'll come home and they'll have a time to, hopefully decompress and try and digest what happened while they were abroad, and hopefully be able to transition back into Canadian life. In the police world, it can be very intense, but that's a lot more rare. But it's more of like a grind, right? Like a cumulative grind of the day in, day out. And especially if you're a uniform officer, you're working the shift work, and so your sleep patterns are all messed up. And so you're always, it just accumulates. I think the stress accumulates over time. And I can speak from firsthand experience. I mean, my job in Ottawa was pretty Gucci, but compared to like a patrol officer on the road in a city or a busy RCMP detachment, you're chronically understaffed. You never have enough people, and the situation has just deteriorated since I got in. My first probably 1 to 2 years on the job were awesome. I felt like we had enough people, but I was also brand new, so everything was shiny and new. But then ever since then, it's been a chronic decline in human resourcing, and the call volume keeps going up, but we never have the resources, mirror that trend. So it definitely is an accumulation, a grind that goes over and over and over again. And I'm biased, but when I see the way that some of those reporters are behaving in that group, I think the officers are probably getting frustrated with both sides, right? Because you can see, it's obvious now to me when I go to those bigger gatherings that the tension is building on both sides, right? And when the tension is rising and you're constantly surrounded by the big crowds, you can't help but become more anxious about the situation you're in, and you're going to probably react maybe harsher than you would have at the beginning, like at the very beginning of the convoy, as compared to like 6 months later.
We talk about the road to mental readiness in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's kind of like just a spectrum, easy, card that we can use to sort of measure how guys are doing in that regard. And irritability is a real sure sign of, that operational stress injury might be setting in. So I'll say that much. And I'm just, I'm looking at the way the same officer kind of, he pushed that one guy out of the way because he said, "Do you know who I am?" And he said, "I don't care." And I was like, that kind of brightened my day a little bit. I was like, good for you, millennial. It's I have hope for the future and thanks to that. And Tom, go ahead.
I just gonna say, just to look at the root cause. I mean, this is my intelligence brain at work. To look at the root cause of the problem there. Yes, there's a crowd. Yes, there's a bunch of TV cameras and lawyers, and there's the Tamara herself, whatever. So yeah, there's excitement. There's a bit of stress up, whatever. But there's no reason for a situation like that to turn into a shoving match with accusations of violence. So the actual proximate cause of that thing was Glenn McGregor trying to shove his way in, trying to push people around like he has done in the past. But if you sort of go up a level of analysis and say what's going on here, the fault here is CTV. They know this guy's a problem. They know he misbehaves. They know it's not like he's pushing on a line somewhere. I get reporters. You got to get the story. You want to get your microphone and you want to be in the front of the line. You want to get the big question. That's fine. I get it. It's a competitive job. It's like everybody else. You got to make a living. But there's a line somewhere. And everybody else there, I think, was sort of staying on their side of the line. Greenspan and Tamara were doing their thing. The Ottawa cops are trying to do their thing. Most of the reporters were behaving like, I don't know, they were civilized human beings. Fair enough. And then there's this one guy that takes a tense situation and pushes it past a point where then it gets into, as Dacey was saying, he's being pushed around. He's trying not to fall on people. And what did Dacey do wrong? Well, nothing, but yet he's in the middle of it. So I don't blame the Ottawa police for this one, although, it could have done a little better. I don't know. I don't blame Tamara Lich or Greenspan. I don't blame Dacey. I don't even blame so much Glenn McGregor in the sense that he did it. I blame CTV and say, you got a problem. This guy pushes past the line every time. Rein this clown in or get rid of him.
If I may add something.
Go ahead.
I would agree with that for the most part, Tom, but I do think that had Glenn McGregor conducted himself like a professional from the beginning, then he could have that exclusive opportunity to interview someone like Tamara Lich, right? Like I remember that exact same press conference you were talking about where he became the agitator right away. And when I was standing back watching the crowd of reporters, I instantly singled him out because I saw that he was wearing a Parliament precinct pass. I used to have one when I was working. And so I knew right away, I'm like, okay, he's a mainstream media guy. And I didn't know who he was. But after everyone had finished speaking, I seen him in the crowd and he physically started to like hop up and down in preparation to go on the attack. Like he was seriously like probably like 6 inches, like bouncing up and down, like straight up and down on his feet, like as if he was preparing to go into the ring to a fight. Like he was psyching himself up to go on the attack.
Yeah, when these people come down, they come down hard.
Yeah. And well, probably because he's not used to being like, he has to amp himself up to be confrontational, right? Like he probably, I don't know his background, but you could see him going through the physiological process of preparing himself to go on the attack. And then he followed us out of that press conference and he was trying to be very pushy, like Tom said at that moment as well. And he even tried to like push through me at a time when we were trying to escort Tamara and the others up through a stairwell to leave the hotel. And he was kind of like, he was almost yelling in like past me, but right by my face. And I remember thinking to myself, like, who is this guy? And so I think, yes, the CTV needs to address this type of behavior, but had some of these reporters conducting themselves like professionals, they would have they wouldn't be so mistrusted and they would have those opportunities for those exclusive high profile interviews.
Well, and Tom was talking about proximate causes, and you mentioned the professionalism piece, and I think you hit the nail right on the head there because, back in the day, it used to be the case that any journalist who became the story was, clearly in breach of professional ethics, and that's kind of what we see right across the board right now is. The media has been co-opted and it's being used to engage in all of this kind of gaslighting and propagandizing against their people they politically oppose. And the cops are even using their reports to substantiate charges and stuff like that in their reports. So it's a really kind of bizarre place to be in, where there's just conflicts of interest in every single institution across the board, and they all seem to be aligned against us. So I'm gonna plug for my usual conspiracy theory, which is Strauss-Howe generational theory, because all the institutions are run by the boomers right now, and that's kind of what I see as the same kind of corruption that I saw in the Canadian Armed Forces for quite a while, especially in Ottawa, is kind of bleeding out just about everywhere here. So Dacey, I think I want to throw it back to you for another comment here, just because I have the impression from some of the video that there's a bit of a history with some of the folks there, like maybe there were other people with their cameras and they're familiar with that camera crew and with McGregor, and because there was that lady who was just like pointing at him and shrieking to get away and stuff. So are you seeing that kind of tension build between the sort of the regular citizen journalist types and the mainstream?
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. I don't necessarily have a problem with Glenn McGregor. He wasn't really, I know he covered some stuff, but he wasn't on my radar till he came on and accused Zhu Wang of using a fake Chinese accent.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
And then he kind of like, I made a post about that. Like, our friend Zhu Wang is from, she's from China. She has a heavy accent. Danny Bulford, you'd probably know. You know her. She spoke after you. I wasn't really impressed with that. And I didn't realize, like, when I was filming there, when Tamara got out, for me, that was kind of the tribe. I had Freedom George, Billings. I had Pat King, and I was getting Tamara for the second time coming out. So I was kind of just trying to film. I had 2 phones going in my live, but I could feel the people pushing beside me. I could hear the people screaming. And then I talked to Jonathan Bill, the Bad Patriot Smoothie. Man, they were pushing hard. Like, that man, Glenn McGregor, is supposed to be there talking about the case, right?
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, he was talking about Brian Dirksen, talking about conspiracy theorists, and accusing a woman from China of having a fake accent. And then he assaulted a bunch of people, allegedly.
Yeah, and kind of the common theme that that I see with a lot of these folks is they're punching down. You know, these are people in positions of power that are punching down on some of the more downtrodden in our society. Like, we're not talking about powerful people. So that's. I think that he has a kind of contempt for the kind of common people that are showing up to support Tamara.
Well, they all do. I sat in on that court case with the Crown there. That man, you should hear the things this guy was saying.
Yeah, my sense is that it's kind of like a snobbery and an elitism. You know, that's what I've seen, at least in my own experience, kind of in the cities and in Ottawa, around the academic circles and stuff like that. There's this kind of contempt for regular people by these self-perceived elites.
Something that I noticed.
Go ahead, Danny.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Dacey, go ahead.
Oh, sure.
No, go ahead.
Well, something that I noticed while I was listening to the play-by-play, like, we took turns, we listened to Live from the Shed and other people who were covering the bail hearing and kind of giving the play-by-play. It definitely sounded as though Mr. Karimji, he also was relying on media reports again, as if it was evidence, similar to what the government did to try and rationalize the Emergencies Act, similar to what the police did, you know, to determine whose bank account should be frozen. And I've never seen that before. Like, since when do you rely on news reporting as evidence in court? I've never seen that. I mean,
so you would have a better position to speak to that than me, but I was sitting in court when they were talking about Pat King, and they were just throwing up the people who were talking basically about him out of context.
Well, and some of the line of questioning that the Crown had for Tamara during the bail hearing, it seemed to me both times that he was trying to conduct almost a mini trial in place of the real trial that will take place, as opposed to just focusing on the breach allegation, which was the reason for the bail hearing to begin with. And I mean, again,
and as well,
I'm
as well,
no
the
I'm no
crowd.
court expert, but I kept just wondering, like, why are you focusing on all of these things that will be addressed in trial, like for the substantive charges, as opposed to focusing on the reason why she was allegedly breached and taken back into custody? That didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, the way they were bringing that up, like you guys are much bigger experts when it comes to these things, I guess, than me. But you know, they were bringing up grounds, and you know, the Crown and last donated $17,000.
I think
From what it sounds like.
we're losing your audio there, Dacey. You're breaking up a bit, buddy. I'm just going to mute you for now. Yeah, I'll give you a minute there to see if that comes back. But yeah, so this is, I think there's a kind of elitism there that's really particular. Like there are several layers to it. You know, there's this generational issue, and there's also this layer of the urban-rural divide, where in the cities there's this kind of dogma that they all parrot. You know, and I see that as a kind of fealty that they all show to the regime, and it's that woke dogma, of course, that we see. And Danny, you were talking a little bit about the. I was just going to throw something. Danny was talking about the. You've never seen everybody kind of go after something like that, like using these reports and so on and so forth. But what I would offer you is that, like, all of the mistakes are kind of in the same direction, right? So we have this overwhelming trend now that seems to imply intent. So we're not talking about mistakes now. And all of these people seem to have the bias in the same direction of doing kind of whatever it takes to stop this convoy and stop Tamara. And for the most part, we're talking about, you know, Ottawa residents, and maybe they're just kind of out of touch with what's really going on out there, and a little too, you know, drunk on the Kool-Aid from the mainstream media that they actually share the same geographic space with. So
I think,
go ahead.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens this fall with the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act.
Right.
And when people like Pat, Tamara, George, and Chris Barber all end up going to trial, because my experience has been that the businesses that chose to remain open flourished, and they probably were only able to survive another few months.
Yeah.
You know, after 2 years of lockdown, because the convoy gave them so much business. And they're the ones that chose to remain open. Their opinion of the convoy is, you know, they're very grateful for the people who came, because their business thrived. You know, people from the convoy were going in and actually like cleaning bathrooms and everything, because of it was middle of winter, slushy, snow, traffic in and out. So they were taking their own initiative to keep these businesses clean, because the business was grateful for the customers, and the customers were grateful that someone was actually willing to serve them. And then the Ottawa residents that I've encountered, and I've even interviewed a handful of them, that came down, people that live and work right in downtown or in the market, they came down to see it for themselves. Yeah. And they report back to me that, like, I can't believe the disconnect from what it's really like on the ground and then what they're saying on the television when I get home. Mm-hmm. Like for some people, that was the wake up call of just how bent the mainstream media has become.
Yeah. And not everybody in Ottawa is an elitist. But I'm thinking there are an awful lot of institutional types, you know, that all go around the same circles, and they all kind of go to the same bars together down on Spark Street and stuff like that. So I'm always saying, like, it's not the rank and file. And I think that the small business owners that you're talking about, and a lot of the service industry folks that you're talking about there, they're kind of the rank and file that, you know, they're a little more in touch with everyday people. But there are an awful lot of, you know, that's where all of the federal institutions are. It's very densely populated by bureaucrats in that particular area. So I think that it follows sort of naturally and logically that they all might have a similar worldview. And whether it's a conscious effort or not, they're kind of engaged in this sort of corruption as a result. But Tom, I think you wanted to make a comment on that there. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sort of hoping that some folks will jump in on this. And what I mean is, I wrote that book on my experience in the convoy, looking at the info war run by the Trudeau government against the convoy. And that's kind of me as a ex-military guy who's been in a conflict zone, whatever. But what I'm hoping is somebody who's a whole lot smarter than I am will actually take up the challenge here and write a book on the judicial process. So right out of the box, why is Tamara being charged with this anyway? There was no violence in the convoy. The only violence in the convoy was offered by the government, not by the protesters. So why is anybody being charged to start with? The next thing is, the very first appearance is in front of a judge who is a Liberal donor, who is a Liberal Party candidate, who was personally endorsed by the Liberal Party leader, Justin Trudeau, who is at the absolute root of the entire problem of the convoy. In any sane world, in any real world, that judge should have popped up and said, oops, sorry, recusing myself.
Yep.
I can't be seen as a judge to be weighing down or punching down on Tamara Lich while I'm getting praise from the Prime Minister, who personally endorsed my candidacy. So right there, I mean, that system should have just ground to a halt. She should have got up and walked out of the courtroom. So there's been a series of these things where, you know, as you mentioned, the Justice of the Peace. Did this guy really understand the process? How did he get there? What was he doing? So I'm hoping some smart lawyer, some retired federal court judge, some retired Supreme Court judge will actually try and put all this together and tell the story of how the justice system has been weaponized by the government to go after Canadian citizens, and how some of them have failed miserably, i.e. the judge in the first case, who's the former Liberal candidate. Well, a couple of judges has behaved, I would actually say, heroically, by pointing out, against the betterment of their careers and against the betterment of their promotion, that the Crown in this case, and the government in this case, has been malicious in its persecution, and I use that term correctly, not prosecution, but persecution of these people. So there's heroes, there's good guys, there's bad guys, there's people just standing there wondering what the hell happened. So I'm hoping some retired Supreme Court judge will dive into this thing, write a book on it, and describe to the citizens of Canada how incredibly bad this process has been in some ways, but how a couple of heroes have actually stepped forward and done the right thing.
Yeah, and I'll just hit that Justice is the Peace point one more time, because I did try to look up what that last one's background was there. And I think all it is like an in-house training session. So it would be, you know, put on by the province or the city or whatever. And they do like a little training session, and then they do like an apprenticeship program where they kind of sit around in court and just observe for a little while. And then they're like, okay, training wheels off, and here you go. And you know, you have a highly, I mean, this is an important case, you know, and it's being thrown to some of these apparent political actors. And I can't believe that the prosecutor is still on this case, quite frankly. I mean, he got called out on that $17K that he donated ages ago. And now he's being called out for, you know, being a little overzealous again. So it's amazing to me that he hasn't recused, or the Bar Association hasn't gotten involved in somehow. Danny, you're smiling at me. Did you want to throw something in there on that?
Well, it's my experience that Crown prosecutors aren't typically very excited about mischief files.
Right.
Yeah. You know, and even my own experience with the Ottawa police, I was told by an Ottawa police officer during the convoy that based on the Crown's direction, they don't even proceed with common assault charges, because they probably don't have the time and the resources to really to charge every single person with every single offense. Right. But they're definitely making a target of the people who are seen as leaders of the convoy, or even people who have been mislabeled leaders of the convoy.
Right. Yeah. Like Pat King was never really an official leader. Andrew Lawton even spent a little bit of time talking about that in his book. He was really more like a social influencer or something like that, but he still managed to get labeled as some kind of a leader and spend more time in jail than any of them.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't take much these days, apparently. But I think
I think Pat was targeted by the media and from the prosecution side because they're trying to make things that he has been recorded saying online in the past. Yeah. They're trying to make that fit this narrative that it's a bunch of, white nationalist insurrectionists. That's why Pat is paying the price that he's paid. Yeah, Even though literally my experience with him during the convoy is we ran into each other a couple of times, very brief. He never influenced anything I did at all. Yeah. And I think what I've said before is like he's loud and he's vocal and he has a big social media following. That's his crime.
Yeah. And that's as far as I understand it as well. Tom, were you trying to say something there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in there. Danny wrote the preface for my book, and in that preface, we address that exact issue, that Jeremy McKenzie and the whole Diagolon thing, and that Pat King and his whole social media thing. Danny worked mostly at the Swiss Hotel. I worked mostly at the Arc Hotel. Both of us are willing to go into court to testify in either federal or criminal court that at no time during our time in the convoy did we see Pat King or Jeremy McKenzie have a operational role, a tactical role, a control role, an influence role, nothing. They had no influence on determining the path of operations of the convoy. Yes, Pat King is, he upsets people with the way he talks. Yes, he said a lot of stuff that I would qualify as stupid, but stupid is not an offense. Stupid is not criminal. Stupid should not wind you up in jail. He is being, I would say, run on these charges because they're literally framing him up to portray him as some sort of leader in the convoy, which he wasn't. And he does have a large social media following, and he does tend to go off course saying stuff sometimes, but that is no reason to charge anybody. And nothing he said as a social media influence in the convoy was worse than, for instance, City Councillor Diana Deans, who made a whole host of false accusations, stuff that was completely out of line. So if somebody should be run by the criminal system for making false accusations and libelous statements, it should be folks like her, not Pat King, who at the end of the day is Joe Citizen with a social media following who has a particularly pointed way of saying things that upsets people. Same goes for Jeremy McKenzie. A lot of stuff he says hilarious. Some of it's a little out there. Freedom of speech says that's legit. So yeah, Danny and I'll both go into court and say neither one of those folks had a leadership role. They weren't accountable or responsible for anything that happened. And what's happened to them is a gross miscarriage of justice.
Yep, 100%. Anytime. I'll swear on that. No problem.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you guys. And I do think that Pat was targeted especially because of, just
W5.
Because he kind of made a good sort of prop, I think, for the state media to use to kind of paint the convoy, like you were saying, Danny, because he may have said some things that were a little off color in the past. And they're able to pretty much tar anything as racist these days. So I'm sure that was the line that they were using. And then putting him out there as being representative of the convoy. Therefore, the convoy is, racist, white supremacist, white nationalist, and all that stuff, or whatever it is that they're saying. So yeah, I think that is the tactic, and it's shameful. Dacey, I thought I'd throw it back to you there for one more comment before we go, because I know you were at Pat King's release as well. What was the atmosphere like there?
Oh man, it was a weird thing to sit in on the court cases themselves. Like I sat in on Pat King's. That crown is a piece of work, but I guess I managed to get the trifecta. I got there just in time for Tamara's release and the shit that went down with Glenn McGregor. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I appreciate all of your support. Danny, nice to see you again. Tom, we'll meet again.
Cheers.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dacey, for doing what you do.
Yeah,
And
glad to connect to work this time.
yeah,
I guess Dacey out. I'm headed to St. Jerome.
awesome,
Good
bro.
to see you.
Take care.
Okay, take care, guys.
All right. Yeah, Dacey's getting to be quite a regular contributor here. He sends a lot of good video and stuff because he's just kind of right where the action is all the time. Yeah, that was pretty fun to kind of have him on here and to hear what's really going on down there in the action, right where things are happening. But yeah, I'll say interesting times that we live in, gentlemen. And, I see some signs that things are turning. Namely, and we've talked about them here, but namely, the judges coming back pretty decisively in favor of the rule of law, and that this persecution of political dissidents has to stop. And of course, we mentioned Artur Pawlowski's case as well. That's pretty huge. Turns out everything they did to him was totally illegal. So that's another civil lawsuit. And I hear people saying, well, Omar Khadr got $10.5 million just for the government not intervening to protect his rights on his behalf. And here we have citizens all over the country with their rights being violated. So that's a lot of $10.5 million as a starting point. But I'll throw it over to you, Tom, there for a final thought, and then we'll go to Danny before we go.
Yeah, well, hopefully this thing with Tamara Lich, this thing with Pat King, the thing with Pastor Pawlowski in Alberta will actually serve a useful purpose in the sense that it's taking the sort of the bad stuff, forcing it up onto the public radar so people can examine what happens. And again, I would like to see someone do perhaps a documentary on Pastor Pawlowski and that whole story, because they actually used a SWAT team to do a hard takedown on that guy on the side of a highway.
Mm-hmm.
And like, for what? Because he's, illegally holding a church service. It's not like he was illegally holding a church service that was packed full of guns. This guy is not violent. He's not confrontational. He hasn't killed anybody. If they want to arrest a guy, put on the lights, pull him over, handcuff him, and drag him off. This idea of using a SWAT team to take this guy down, this to me was made for TV kind of activity. And hopefully now, it's blown up in their face that the process just blew up in the face of the province of Alberta that persecuting this guy, and let's be clear, it was persecution, was bad. It was wrong. The fact that we now have underground churches in Canada, to me, it's just stunning. This isn't China. We're not in friggin' Rwanda or Soviet Russia. We're in Canada. And the fact that we have to have underground churches in Ontario, in Alberta, and other places is stunning. So hopefully I'm a bit more positive that the Glenn McGregors of the world are misbehaving so badly. The mainstream media is misbehaving so badly that people are going to start seeing just how bad the situation really is, and they're going to start pushing back. So I'm a little bit optimistic. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. I can't remember if that's Sun Tzu or Napoleon, but it's words to live by. Danny, over to you, buddy, for the final thought of the day.
That was a perfect comment, because that's a conversation I've had many times with people that I've come to know as a result of the convoy. We just got to keep speaking out, keep doing what we're doing. They are tripping over their own feet, right? Yeah. Like every time they stomp, the rake comes up and hits them in the face even harder, right? Like they're continuously destroying their credibility more and more. And I think I actually was speaking to Roman Baber a while back, and he said that he thinks that they overplayed their hand with COVID. And I heard him say that on an interview with Jordan Peterson, and I agree. And I think beyond the COVID response pushed a lot of people right to their limit, and many people like us beyond, where we're not going to tolerate that continued kind of behavior from our government. And now if they're going to try and push the same farming agenda as what we're seeing in the Netherlands, and if they keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually, with the popularity diminishing on a steep downward trend, the harder they push this agenda, I think the more and more resistance they're gonna be met with. So we just got to keep speaking out. And you guys, certainly about Matthias Desmet and the mass formation, right? His two of his more recent interviews that I really enjoyed, he was talking about how the people that have bought into the mass formation hard, they're not going to be convinced with evidence, no matter how much of the evidence is on our side or in our favor. You have to appeal to their sense of humanity and kind of to remind them that we're still the same people that they knew before. Like, I'm specifically talking about relationships that kind of soured as a result of this.
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, if they're hardcore disagreement with you on something related to the convoy or something related to the vaccine, you know, there's other things that you could possibly plant that seed with them, you know, like fuel costs, like food costs, you know, and then, because I think that might be like the intro point for people that aren't willing to totally come to your way of thinking with the COVID response, but that might be a way that you could plant that seed about how this whole globalist agenda intertwines.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
a long-winded last comment. Sorry
No,
about that.
it's all good. I appreciate the a complete thought, at least anyway, because that's what we're after here. Yeah, I think we're getting to that point, like you said. You were talking about mass formation psychosis, and I talk a lot about you know, the religious impulse and all this, and how Nietzsche said that the more we secularized as a society, the more we would put that religious impulse into the state. And I point out that Christopher Hitchens once said that the only way to respond to a theocrat is with ridicule and contempt. And I think that all of these things kind of go along the same lines. Essentially, I find that people are so kind of self-assured with this, with being within the mob and this self-righteousness, and we're talking about feelings, really. And you're right that you're not going to be able to appeal to their reason when they're so completely, you know, when they're in that emotional space. They're so in the tank for this idea that they'll compartmentalize, and they won't allow their reason to kind of get into that little space. So yeah, I talk about harder tactics, kind of hitting them in the feels and stuff like that, and just kind of letting them know the moral aberration of the moral egregiousness of their position, that sort of thing. And I think that we're kind of talking about the same thing, but we're coming at it very differently. You seem to want to appeal to their compassion, which I think is also very very useful. Maybe not for people that are all that far gone, but yeah, if they're still kind of within reason, then you can definitely appeal to their compassion. But ultimately, I think that there's an emotional level where we got to start connecting with people now, because that's where everybody's headspace is at the moment, and it's not a good place to be, that's for sure. But thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you being so generous with your time, and it was really great having you guys on again. So we'll welcome you back soon. And Tom, I'm sure we'll be talking again even tomorrow or the next day, no doubt. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, troops, and stay frosty and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Jeff.